Welcome, everybody, to Friday Forum's special podcast and our first one we've ever done. I'm really pleased to be here on behalf of GovLaw and the regulators. My name is Troy DeSouza. Many of you will know me from many years, over 29 years in local government work across the province, and just happy to be here and very, very privileged today to have my special guest, Lorne Fletcher, with me. Lorne's been the manager of community safety and municipal enforcement at the City of Langford for probably equally that time, but before that, he's had a career over 30 years. Is it over 30? Like sometime, what's the number, Lorne? Remember?
Let's shoot at 33 years.
33 years. So he is my senior in this process. And what we really wanted to do is bring to you today an opportunity to have both from a bylaw side of things and a legal side of things, the kind of work that we're involved with. Before we get into the rest of the program, the quick lowdown here is we are primarily looking at your questions, Q&A, and we're going to be here to answer your questions. We've got some thoughts already about some other things we may talk about, but more importantly, when you're doing your Q&A, we ask that you put it to the chat function. And with us, we have Spencer Brown, who's a lawyer at GovLaw, and he'll be the moderator, and he'll look at your chat questions and he'll relay them to us, and we'll ask as best as we can. And if we don't have the full answers, we'll follow up and send you all an email. So keep it pretty useful for you. This process here is really about you and giving you a chance to talk to experts in this field without the cost of things. I mean, some of you know that we do webinars once a month. On Thursdays, they're lunch and learn webinars. Those are paid, they're different. And Spencer's got one next month on conflict issues, which will be great for municipal stuff in the elections coming up. But we really wanted to have a chance just to engage everybody without any cost about the issues that you're facing in your field and how we can help. So with that, Lorne, welcome. And so good to have you here. And I'm just maybe wondering, what are the issues today at the city, or what you're hearing from in the bylaw field?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. As usual, bylaw enforcement are problem solvers in the community, and there's a wide range. And over the years, what at one time I often refer to traditional bylaw enforcement was dealing with land use issues, soil deposit, soil removal, assisting the building inspectors with building issues. That whole role continues, but now we're seeing an expansion, mainly because of the unhoused situation. And I know a lot of communities are struggling with dealing with managing public spaces. And in addition to that, there's some communities that are also engaged in short-term rentals, that type of thing. So I can't speak to that directly, but that is an area of awareness that I do have.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one of the things I've found over our years of experience, when we started this, we're often dealing with people, and it was pretty straightforward. You're breaking a law, and okay, let's try to get compliance. But now we've got so much mental illness issues too, and what we're finding that we have to do is, if someone we believe or has a mental capacity, we work with a provincial agency called the Public Guardian Trustee, PGT, and we work with them towards getting compliant. So for me, it's like there's another person in play now, which it doesn't complicate it, but it adds to the process.
Yeah, you're right, Troy. The other factor that we have to take into account is that, especially when we're dealing with mental health issues, the area historically was dealt with by our police agencies, and we're seeing more and more now of a blending of responses. Some of the mental health initiatives, either provincial, federal, have ramped up to some degree, but invariably what happens with the local government situation is, when we aren't addressing it through the higher levels of government, we're left at the local government level to basically deal with what is happening in our public spaces. And we don't have enough police, we don't have enough health providers to deal with that. So invariably it's fallen to our bylaw enforcement officers in many communities.
Yeah, no, for sure. And 5 years ago, I looked into the cost of policing and bylaw, And we have seen an incredible increase in terms of, you know, the amount of work that's blended, like you say, like our expansion to areas of what used to be more policing has gone considerably high, and yet local governments, some of them still have to face cost of policing. Well, the cost of a police officer is $180,000. This is a few
Maybe
years
more.
ago.
Maybe
I
more.
think it's more now, for
Yeah.
sure. When you get all of that packaged together, whereas I think, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but cost of Bylaw was about 80,000 for an entry level plus all the package. Like, what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, the thing about bylaw enforcement in BC is there's no set, there still is no set standards, be it training, be it compensation levels. It is a varied target, really, truly it is. It's bylaw enforcement officers in the province of BC are the largest group of unregulated regulators in this province.
That's a good thing, right?
Well, no,
Yeah,
from
okay.
the perspective of providing a standard
Yeah,
and a balance throughout all communities in the province, so that residents know what to expect.
yeah.
That is still problematic for for many people. We're moving slowly towards some standardization, but it can't come soon enough.
No, fair enough. Maybe at this stage, I'll just check with our moderator to see if any questions are coming down the pike.
Not at the moment, but I'll put that out to our audience. If anyone in attendance today would like to pose a question at this juncture, please do so in the chat.
Sounds good. So I want to pick up on standardization because, like, having a practice all over the province, what works for the city of Langford or somewhere more urban doesn't work for, a smaller community like, for argument's sake, we've got some, Lanceville or, places up in Orlo or whatever it is. There's
Yeah.
tons of places, Midway, that are just small communities. So I always try to reconcile standardization
Right.
with the local community.
Yeah. One of the areas that is especially problematic when you put it in that context is the fact that some communities are under-resourced when it comes to bylaw enforcement team.
Yeah.
I'm very fortunate. I've got an amazing group of officers. They're good, really good at what they do. Given the numbers, my mayor and council have historically always been involved in paying attention to what's going on in the community, of course. But they do listen to what staff, myself, or directors or our admin people are basically relaying. And so I feel fortunate in that we're properly resourced. But going back to your comment, some smaller communities are very woefully under-resourced.
Yeah.
And I really feel for say the sole bylaw enforcement officer in a community who's having to consider dealing, now let's go back to the unhoused, mental health issues. Now you've got people who are out there on their own dealing with what could be a very charged situation,
Right.
not knowing the outcome, the nature of an individual they might be dealing with. We've had situations in this province where bylaw enforcement officers have been attacked, have been injured in some respects. And so a community really has to pay attention to that and properly pay attention to work safe requires in training and resourcing for employee protection.
No, for sure. And I've represented some of those folks in situations. It's horrendous. It can be career killers, and it's a financial penalty as well, right? For just doing your job. I mean, we see there's a general trend that there's a lot of agitation with some aspects of law enforcement, and from Bylaw's point of view, I'm always suggesting that we step back a little bit, rather than fully engage, because we don't have the necessary training and equipment that the police do, right? And so what's your thoughts on that? Is it in terms of step back approaches?
Yeah, it comes down to resourcing and funding and those types of things. As we talked about earlier, the cost for a police officer is way up there.
Yeah.
When we realize that fully 50% of a local government's budget primarily is going to be dedicated to community safety, such as fire protection and policing, you now roll bylaw enforcement into that. You're now putting yourself in a position where you're trying to decide which of your resources are better placed in dealing with these emerging situations out there on the street.
Yeah, no, for sure. And one of the things I always like to do is say, look, we've got the importance of local compliance and enforcement cannot be understated. There used to be a theory called broken windows, which I kind of like, but some people don't like the wording so much. I'm trying to use domino theory or something,
Yeah.
but if we deal with the little laws and get some compliance, the big problems take care of themselves, right?
Yeah.
We're regulatory enforcers. And so I like the notion of getting compliance with these laws at the local level because it gets people aware, gets people used to a process of, oh, there are laws and let's try to follow them. And if there are these laws and they're enforcing them, they're probably going to enforce those bigger laws.
Yeah, in my experience, a good bylaw enforcement officer is able to connect with an individual quite readily, right at the onset. I've always considered bylaw enforcement to be a sales job,
Okay.
where if you can sell someone on that concept, voluntary compliance,
Yeah.
then you're a star at your job.
Yeah.
More and more we're seeing people putting positions where sales work or voluntary compliance isn't necessarily an option, especially when you're moving bylaw enforcement officers into patrol work. There's a different set of criteria there, and so that's really changing the face of bylaw enforcement overall.
Yeah. No, amazing. Sorry, Spencer, you're
Troy, yes, we have a couple of questions from the community here. First is from Lee Elliott, who asks, what do you say
Lee.
Hi,
to
Lee.
communities
Yeah.
who place outward image over officer safety?
Oh, wow. Um, Really interesting question from Lee, and I think from our practice in our field, Lauren, the number one thing that has to matter is officer safety, right?
Absolutely.
Safety, because you're not going to put people out there. And like you say, the worst situation is if you're by yourself or something. We've seen the assaults. We know these things are happening. I've actually witnessed a guy with handcuffs behind his back assault a police officer by headbutting him in his face. Like, I mean, and if they're willing to do that, the police, I mean, what the hell are they going to do to bylaw, much less the public?
Yeah. Um, well, with respect to officer safety, that comes down to the very nub of what WorkSafe BC is requiring of any employer. If you're employing bylaw enforcement officers, the image should be no part of this. The important part is making sure that your staff are safe, be it a building inspector, a building official, be it a bylaw enforcement officer, engineering technician, anything like that. You've got to make sure that you do a risk assessment and account for every possibility. And a very thorough risk assessment is not a quick and easy task. I've done a few of those for my team, and this most recent one that I pursued ended up with I'm guessing here about a 15 to 20 page document.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a lot of key areas that you have to take into account and then respond. By documenting it and then properly responding, you're actually fulfilling the requirements of WorkSafe BC.
Right.
I hope that answers Lee's question.
I think so. And I think what you're also pointing out is if you don't do these things administratively, there's going to be a lot more headaches. And
Yes.
there's also potential for, you talk about the public image. Well, that's not going to help your public image if things like that sort of come out.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, certainly our mayors and councils or regional boards should have some say as far as what their staff are out there portraying, or the image for community representation. But there has to be a balance there, there has to be an element of listening and reason and some really good conversations. And that's one thing I have to say. I've been so fortunate over the years. I've always had support from the political or even the administrative levels.
Right.
But one of the keys to that always is making sure you stay in touch, keep those folks informed, because they're making decisions sometimes without enough information. So my job is to make sure that they've got that information and they have a true sense of what is necessary.
Yeah, makes sense.
That's great. We have Alex Volchek, who's asking if you guys could speak to the City of Victoria's Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan.
I'm not sure if I want to get into specifics. I'm always very cautious about talking about clients that we represent without their authorization.
Fair enough.
I do want to say something about community safety and specifically with local governments like Langford, Victoria, others that use the words community safety officers.
Yes.
I really like that trending because I think it really is what you're doing, and it puts bylaw in a different tier in terms of recognizing its higher responsibilities and frankly expertise. What say you?
Well, I'm going to brag a bit here.
Yeah.
In 2005, I worked very closely with Mayor and Council of the day, and we basically created a community safety officer model. That was 2005. Within 4 years, we were recognized by the Union of BC Municipalities for best practices at our police support initiative, which had our officers basically dealing with levels of community upset or concern that were directly tied to regulatory bylaws that Mayor and Council had created over the years. And so that is a trend that has actually increased throughout the province. You're seeing more and more communities now, and part of it is being forced into it because of our protection, or need to protect and defend our public spaces. And so we're seeing more and more of that community safety approach. I have read Victoria's report, as Alex was asking about, but yeah, like you, it's not really the place right now to be commenting on that. I am aware of the substance of it, though.
Yeah, and I also noticed with a lot of other types of local enforcement, like First Nations, they're also calling their officers community safety too. So
Absolutely.
I'm thinking there's a trend here, and I think that the trend should continue where you've got policing for sure. You've got what I consider to be like different types of local service, whether it's at the bottom where you talk about parking, or more significantly public safety, animal
Different
control,
years, yeah.
yeah, bylaw enforcement. But that community safety is almost like this bridge between bylaw and police that to me reflects the trend of where we're heading, right?
It's a shared responsibility, Troy. Absolutely. Yeah.
Good, good. One of the things I also wanted to mention is that, when our officers often hit a roadblock with compliance, right? There's sometimes a concern or fear of how do you go to the next step? How do you get compliance because their resources are limited, right? The caution with respect to legal services, and I'd like your take on it from a client perspective, is that, okay, it could be really costly and, you're spending tens of thousands of dollars when in fact, like to me, the three basics of quick compliance legally is letters, right? Demand letters that can hopefully solve if they get 30% done.
Toolbox, yeah.
Yeah. Consent orders, which again could get you guaranteed compliance if there's agreement on the other side. And then an information prosecution, which doesn't require council approval. It's basically a multi-pronged count, like a municipal ticket information or a bylaw notice.
Right.
But it gets you compliance because that's what the courts are allowed to give you. They give you that powers. What are your thoughts on those sort of options?
Well, as you pointed out, prosecution actions are basically adjunct to the fact that our regulatory bylaws at the local government level are all tied back to the Offence Act. And so a violation against a bylaw is a violation tied to, as I said, the Offence Act itself. It doesn't require any council input because basically council's already adopted its bylaw. Yeah. Our job now in bylaw enforcement is to make sure that those regulatory bylaws are being followed. And as I started out by saying earlier, let's sell them on the concept, sell the folks on the concept of voluntary compliance. Yeah. And if we're not successful, our other tools, of course, are ticketing and prosecutions and those types of things. When we get into more of the consent type of issues, where we're involving the Supreme Court as an example, that's a different kettle of fish because now we as staff, as bylaw enforcement officers, we're now going down a road that's going to be have the implications of spending the taxpayers' dollars directly. And so we want to make sure that our politicians, our mayors and councils, our regional board have a say as to whether or not we have enough at stake to make that investment by hiring legal counsel and going through those court processes. Because that's sort of where you're.
It is, and I think the one distinction is that in the Supreme Court injunction, I always recommend that there's a senior level like council or board that makes the decision. There are a lot of local governments, as you know, though, that have senior management or city solicitors that can make that sign off too, right?
Yeah.
And that's all good. But the distinction I have too is if you're just doing a consent order, you're not actually at the point where you're incurring those those costs, you're actually at the point where you're trying to get compliance with consent and without costs, right?
Yeah.
So if you're able to do that, go for it. If you can't do that, then that's fine too, because that does is you made an attempt at a consent order,
Right.
and that becomes a staff report to council to approve legal action.
Yeah.
Right. So, and I think the other thing I want to really get together to state at this level in our conversation, we're at the end of January, close to beginning of February.
Yeah.
We have municipal elections coming in October. So the one thing I'd always advise our clients to do is don't get ahead of your skis. And I know you're a very good skier. So if you're thinking of doing something that could be really make sense for compliance, I would at this year, and only like this year, is just make sure council's got some direction or input to give you. So it's coming from them, not from you. What say you to that?
Yeah, well, having been in this line of work and working in local government for over 30 years, I've gone through a few elections, and there is it's important for staff to, and we all are, to be aware of the fact that there are certain adjustments in levels of sensitivity as we head into an election year. And so you want to do your best to make sure that you're constantly informing council, that you're getting feedback from council or regional board if you're with a local regional government. But you want to make sure that your information flow is constant.
Yeah.
And if those who are in the governance area, we're operational, they're in governance. If they believe that there's a reason to not proceed on something, it's not our choice. We have to basically follow. We all know council may enforce its bylaws.
Right, right. And and with that too, I think that council should also be advised and boards be advised that, look, if you're going to do something, there, possibly public consequences, right? There's some controversy, some pushback, whatever the issue is, so that they're fully informed, right?
Yeah.
And then they can still make the choice. They're the governing authority. But it's got to be up to them, right?
Yeah.
And so they have that information and can go from there.
Yeah, Troy, there's been times in the past where I've had, say, an officer pursue an enforcement action, and I've had to pull them back because, unbeknownst to them, and it's not necessarily a bad reflection on anybody, but this happens in a lot of communities. There are other things happening in the background. All of staff is not made aware of some of the happenings, some of the dealings and other areas. So you always want to be cautious and make sure that you're not going down a road, because in some cases you might not have all the information and you could be creating a bit of a turmoil that you don't want to have any part of.
For sure. And there's a story I always like to tell about a lawyer I like and respect. He's always on the opposite side, John Alexander.
Oh,
Do you remember? Good guy. I don't know if he practices as much anymore. Very senior, experienced guy. But we had a very contested litigation, which I knew we were going to win, right? I was very happy with that. And then comes, the October elections. And literally a few days after that, John calls me up and says, "Yep, so you're going to shut down your litigation now?" And I said, "Yep," because the council had switched fully, right? They
Yeah.
just gone the other way, and that was the direction, and I knew that was coming. And so it's a reminder to me that, we're ultimately work for elected officials, right?
Who
And
in turn are representing the people
Yeah.
who put them into those positions of decision making.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, fair enough. Spencer, how are we doing there, Chief?
Doing good. We have a question from Rob Esau. He's asking, what do you say to people in all walks of life that say we are in a dangerous profession?
That we are in a dangerous
We are
profession?
not in a dangerous.
Oh, we're not in a dangerous profession. Wow. So
Good
Can I
opportunity for
start
a
with
bit
you?
of good opportunity for a little job shadowing, perhaps.
Yeah. I mean, and I know Rob works out in Lillooet, it's a smaller community again.
I've met Rob as well.
Yeah, I think again, it comes back to what you're saying before. You're isolated. If you're the guy, you're the guy
Or the gal.
or the gal.
Yeah.
And you may not have the ability to partner up, right? I think there is danger. And I think there's danger in Lillooet, as I think there is in
Yeah.
Langford, as I think there is in Victoria. So I disagree with people who say that they're not in a dangerous profession. unfortunately, like I mentioned before, the society's changed. I mean, when society and people are physically challenging law enforcement, I think that's where we're at right now.
Yeah.
With social media, with
Big
phones.
shift.
It's not what it used to be 30 years ago. I mean, you know, when we're growing up and stuff, and our parents, we used to be kind of afraid of the police a bit. You know, we're afraid of law enforcement. We don't want to get in trouble,
There you go.
right? But nowadays, it's much more like
Defiance.
it is defiance, right? And that's just not with my teenage daughters either, right? You know they're trouble, right?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I went through that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's a different culture, and so I can only suggest that. And how do you fix that? I mean, I think part of that is educating the council and the boards, right?
Well, if I can interject there, you know, we talked earlier about risk assessment. People who make or come to a conclusion or make a statement like that, I'm going to suggest they're not fully aware, and we work in a world of evidence-based information and all of that, of course, you know, dealing with the law and everything. But people who are making those kinds of comments should be challenged as to what facts are they basing that premise on, or that opinion on. I would say, let's go back to that risk assessment that I talked about earlier. Those are going to be your key to success. Make sure that that information is available. And when somebody raises that kind of a statement, help them out, help them understand what they're missing.
Right. And I will even a step further. Both of us are part of an association, the
Yes.
LGCA, Local Government Compliance Enforcement Association.
Right.
Officers. What I would suggest is that association, LGCA, and the people watching on this right now, take a role in terms of officer safety, and they have actually, they've done that, right?
Been doing a great job, yes.
But perhaps even communicating, maybe once a year, send a missive to all the local governments saying, you know, this is not your grandfather's local government. You know, it's a different world.
Well, as I said a bit earlier, we've moved away from what I've often referred to as traditional bylaw enforcement, where you know, at one time, bylaw enforcement officers were just dealing with the basics as far as supporting the building officials, land use, you know, dealing with land use issues, that kind of thing, noise complaints and animal control. The whole role has shifted in a significant way.
Yeah.
So, you know, the world has changed, as you said.
Yeah, and I'll say one other thing I just wanted, because I think that's an important point Rob mentioned, is that, you know, at the end of the day, well, I think this is a great profession to be in, and
Is it ever?
It is. I love the people in it.
Yeah.
I love the expansion of the jurisdiction that's happening. Like it's a lot more complex and analytically fulfilling, right? When you problem solving, like you say, you're always problem solving.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, this is not a job that's worth risking your life for. You know,
That's a good point.
it's just not.
Yeah.
And it's not worth a job also that you're putting yourself unnecessarily in harm's way. So, you know, I've gone through the gambit. I think when I started, I was probably a lot more hot-headed and, hey, let's take this thing on.
You hot-headed?
I know. Can you imagine that? I was a little hot-headed, but now I'm more like, okay, let's not engage in something that will get us into a physical altercation that we can't control.
Training.
Right.
Training. Let's take that into account. If a local government wants to truly be responsible to keep its staff safe, there are training programs out there that help you decide, when do I need to tactically reposition or run away.
Yeah, that's right.
So, you know, there's so many moving parts now to that profession. I mean, any member of staff potentially is in a dangerous position. Every time we get into our city car, or, you know, to drive somewhere, we're at risk, right? But it's the human element now that has been introduced into specifically bylaw enforcement. It wasn't always that big a part, but now the human element has become a greater proportion of risk.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
I'm going to move us along as the questions are beginning to add up.
Yes.
We have from bylaw, what bylaw offenses, aside from unsightly premises, that get to the point where remedial action is required, can be recovered through taxes?
No, well, I mean, remedial action
By itself
is
provides the
recoverable.
mechanism for recovery, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And more importantly, the law is basically municipalities have a wider range on remedial action options.
Yes.
It's a little more limited with regional districts to
True.
you know, yeah, it's just it's a limited much more. There's scope of jurisdictions there, and both are recoverable. But to me, that's like dealing with the property type issues, right? And how you're trying to solve things.
You know, if a person were to ask me who was interested in pursuing on behalf of their council an investigation, coming up with remedial action steps, my best advice to them would be read section 72, 73, 74 of the community charter and make sure that you follow the steps. There are a load of communities out there who are starting to use those remedies more frequently. Reach out to others. And another tip is when you're getting to the point where you're going to be introducing the staff report and the order, the wording of the order itself, get a legal review. Have a legal review done of that document. If it's your first time out, by all means, that is a key to your success. And make sure that you think of all of the what ifs, like the cost recovery component. What is this remedial action? What does it consist of? What are potential costs? What are you going to have to be able to establish or prove out? Environmental issues, those kinds of things. Take all of that into account.
For sure. And I guess what I was also trying to say as well is, it's really about hazards and nuisances, right? Municipalities like Langford can do both. Regional districts are primarily only with the hazards, right?
Yes.
But there's so many times I've seen regional districts try to squeeze a sausage into the hazard, and it may not be quite there. It's more a nuisance, right? So I think your point about getting some legal advice is probably good.
Yeah.
Because
this isn't a plug for GovLaw, by the way.
it is a plug for GovLaw. Talk to Spencer. But we've actually, when we have had to go to court, right? And, councils or boards make a decision.
Right.
So you've got this remedial order, but now it needs to be enforced, and you go there to enforce it. We've had points where, you come in with your contractors and they're like, no, we're not letting you get on.
Yeah.
The police will not help you, right? Because the police will only deal with it if it's an order from the court. So you've now got to get what I call a kinder, gentler injunction.
Yes.
Just to enforce the decision by council or a board. And that's the enforcement clause you get. So you got to get that, but it still means that the court will look at the terms of the order as you've talked about. Is it within their jurisdiction, their authority, and their scope, really, right?
Right.
But once you've got that, then you can get the order, and then you're getting compliance.
Yeah.
Right?
And always worth thinking about judicial review.
Absolutely.
It's down the road potentially.
Yes.
But an awareness around that possibility is very important as well.
Right. In fact, so once the council board makes that order, that can get challenged right away to the BC Supreme Court, and they're dealing with different things. So, yeah, again, look at what we're talking about, right? I mean, just step back from this. I mean, 20 years ago, we weren't dealing with this. I mean, 20 years ago.
Well, we didn't have the community charter.
True. But there were other provisions, right? But the thing is, even I remember when we started, you'd go to get an injunction on unsightly premises. You don't need to do that now, right? But the scopes are different. The law is different. There's so much differences. But what is consistent is the practice of bylaw and compliance is more complex and it's broader.
By far.
Right? Yeah.
By far. Yeah.
Okay.
Rob is asking, what's the recommended action for places that can't afford the upfront cost of immediate remediation?
They can't afford the upfront costs of, yeah, it's a good question. So I'll jump into this because we get this a lot, right?
Yeah.
Remediation. As not many local governments. I mean, Langford's and others, they're at a big enough level where
That's right.
They're gonna pay for their
We've undertaken a
contractors.
few of these in recent times. Yeah.
So you're gonna stick it on the taxes and go from there. But that cost could be as low as $10,000 and as high as perhaps $100,000 or more, right? I would say probably 60% of local governments can't afford that, right? That's not in their bailiwick. And so the only options I would suggest to that sort of thing where you can't afford the cost is to get you can still do the remediation order. But when it gets down to an enforcement, like if you're
Mhm.
gonna enforce it, the injunction terms are not that you're gonna do it and cover those costs, but they've got to do it. And if they don't do it by a certain court order deadline, then becomes a breach. It
Now you've
becomes a
got a contempt issue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the only way I'd face it. And then
Mhm.
everyone should know that when local governments go to court for a contempt application, right? There's a breach of a court order.
Yeah.
Then essentially upon a successful declaration that the court says, yes, there's a contempt, you automatically get what's called special
Special
costs.
costs. Yeah.
And that's 100% of your cost recovery
There you go.
on the application. So that's the way I would finagle that.
Yeah.
It's not perfect and it's not as quick as the ones that you guys can do if you have the financial capacity.
Yeah. It could be a protracted process. You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, this is the only way you can sort of like not pay those upfront costs and then put it on them to breach and then be in contempt. But again, you know, sometimes we're getting pushbacks from the courts. You know, they know the game that we're playing, but we want to not pay for that. So when you're framing your action, for instance, you got to not have the option of we're going to clean it up.
Yeah.
You don't want that out because you don't want them to have another out. You just want to say, you're going to clean it up and here's the deadline. Right.
Yeah. Certainly more cost effective.
Yeah, totally.
Simone Mann is asking, from your experience working with bylaws, what are the most common freedom of information and protection of privacy challenges local governments face? And how do you balance transparency with privacy obligations in day-to-day enforcement work?
Yeah. So who reported me? Well, oftentimes that is the whole premise under which someone is going to make an FOI request. I'm being a bit glib there, but no, we have to recognize the fact that the Act itself does provide local governments with the ability to sever, legitimately sever certain bits of information. And so I think if you have a very skillful group in your legislative services or even whoever is doing your FOI work, you know, you're going to be in a good position just by following the Act itself, you know, to make sure that you're equally transparent, but still protective of those who are required to be protected. In where I am, we do receive FOI requests for bylaw enforcement files, content, of course, and some of those files are quite complex. And there's a lot of material involved, especially if they've gone on over years. I'm thinking land use issues specifically tend to be a little more complicated. But I've got a terrific team at Langford for freedom of information vetting, and so that first step goes through, comes back to me. I look for other things like mosaic information that could be a giveaway, those kinds of things. So there is some requirement for a good hands-on, but my recommendation is follow the Act, follow the provisions of the Act, and consult with the province on this. You'll be in a good position. Yeah,
and there's a lot of from the Office of Privacy Commissioner, a lot of cases and stuff, so you can get some more background if you're not sure how provisions of the Act would be interpreted. But let me ask you more specifically, you've got an active investigation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, is there not like a protection for those active ones as opposed to the closed ones, or?
Yeah, there is. Anytime that the potential outcome or the integrity of an investigation could be compromised, that's a good point. We do have the ability to put that request on hold and wait until the file's concluded, that we're comfortable that we've achieved what we need to achieve with respect to compliance, and then we can pick that up and continue with it. But of course, you want to keep your source of inquiry up to date. I've had that with one file in particular where over a period of years we've had to continually get back in touch with that inquiry and just say, still under investigation. Unfortunately, we can't share anything more at this time.
Right. Yeah. This is the never-ending investigation, right?
Never-ending investigation.
It's like the never-ending story.
Don't laugh. I received a 1987 file. Langford wasn't incorporated until 1992. Yes. From the regional district, I did receive a 1987 file that was only concluded. I only concluded it 3 years ago.
Yep. You know what? I've had a file that went through.
It's not because I'm lazy.
I had a file from a local government, went through 3 different law firms, ended with ours, but it was over a 25-year period.
Good heavens.
And it was a Supreme Court injunction. Yeah, multiple orders. And so I think, and these people weren't sophisticated enough to get FOIs and stuff on it, but if they had, it was like, this is ongoing, and then we thankfully concluded it finally. But like, even I remember getting a notice in the quarters, we think this is the longest litigation we've seen here in this registry, right? So it was interesting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sean Ilmaz is asking how municipalities typically address unauthorized construction from a bylaw enforcement and ticketing perspective, as opposed to through building code compliance. And further, how does this align with unauthorized secondary suites and enforcement?
My question, Spencer, is why Sean giving us such complicated two-parted things? And my brain can only work with
Is there
one.
a question in there?
Yeah, I hear there's a statement, Sean. Did you get any of that? Like,
well, I mean, the building officials, of course, have their own authority, their own power, and tied back to the provincial building code, of course, and then the regulatory bylaw.
Yeah.
Good practice would basically say, you know what, the building officials take this as far as they can, using those as a basis, those two pieces of regulation. But when it comes to a point where and it's interesting, I had a chat with one of my officers this morning about this. The building inspection department needs to move ahead with some enforcement steps.
Yeah.
So as you know, as a lawyer, you want to make sure that the history is firmly documented, clearly documented, and that's all the steps taken to inform, to request, to cajole, however you want to term it, those steps have all been taken. So oftentimes what you'll have is the initial steps being taken by the building inspection department. They run it as far as they possibly can. And the last comment should be a letter going to that individual responsible for the breach. If this isn't dealt with, if this isn't resolved by this date, it will be referred to bylaw enforcement for further action.
Yes.
If that happens, then the bylaw enforcement officer takes all of that historical material, rolls it into the bylaw enforcement file, gets a good understanding of what the situation is, and then picks up from there. And that's where some of the tools that we use are good looks, charm, sales skills. Start off, with that, and then after that, get into maybe forms of correspondence, personal visits, discussions, try to know who you're dealing with, and create that relationship, that bonding purpose and resolution piece. And if that is unsuccessful, then you start using the tools that cost, ticketing, and prosecutions and those kinds of things. So it should be a smooth transition. And it would help if, maybe you do have a policy in place that guides staff in those areas.
Well, Lorne, you've always had the good looks and charms on this, so I know that's the key to your success.
Yeah, don't confuse me with someone who's good looking and charming.
No, but I think you've summarized the best practices here, dealing with like building to bylaw, which also applies from planning to bylaw or parks to bylaw. Like, to me, the bylaw and compliance shop is the law enforcement arm of a local government, right?
Yeah.
More so than police. Police is they are there for a different master.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So you are there for the local government, and that's why all of these entities have to figure things out, work on what they're trying to do from their purposes, try to get compliance in their normal way, but they don't have the skill set to take the next step. And when the next step, this is why compliance is so important, is like, you've got to not just understand the bylaw that you're dealing with, or like the builders, the planners, and all these, you need to know all that, which is frankly can be very complex. Specific, and I'm thinking like planning, zoning issues, or building issues, right? They can really get complex. And then you've got to take the knowledge and understanding you have, and then translate that to, well, how do we get compliance now? What are our options? Sometimes you can work it yourself, whether it's going to be a ticketing form, or whether it's going to be some consent order or letter. Sometimes you need some help legally, right? But it is a really good way and a repository, I think, to have that law enforcement then take that. And of course, it doesn't mean you stop talking to those folks. It's still like, okay, maybe at some point, if it goes a certain step, we're going to need an affidavit, or we're going to need some evidence or something else, or it's an ongoing thing, right? So it's there's always also another side to that. So once you get to that point, and you try to deal with that, sometimes people lawyer up, right? And whenever they lawyer up to me, that's the first signal you gotta like, okay, take a pause back. Let's do some additional diligence, right? Don't just say, okay, they've lawyered up. Sometimes they just do it for lawyering, but okay, what's their argument? What's their point? And then you take that back to building.
Pay
and
attention
say,
to that, yeah.
Yeah, okay, does this make sense? And where do we go from here? So,
Yeah, just stepping back though, one of the areas of success within the organization itself, so within the local government, ensure, and this might sound a bit cliche, but ensuring you do not have or you've not established silos between different departments. And this is something in bylaw enforcement that I've always stressed with my team, is we are not necessarily the subject matter experts when it comes to land use, when it comes to building. I mean, if we were experts in all of that, everyone else could go home, we could run the city, right? Or the town.
right.
We're not those people. And so my officers are really good at going and consulting with the subject matter experts,
Right.
and getting from them, how are you interpreting? How would you interpret this? Our purpose in our role in bylaw enforcement is to interpret for enforcement purposes,
Right.
for information and evidence gathering purposes. But let's get a good hold on what the department who's responsible for that bylaw, how they view the content of the bylaw, the application of the bylaw. And so if you can create that within your organization as a starting point,
Yeah.
sometimes things will not go off the rails that way, where you've got all of a sudden somebody's being pushed into a corner, and now it's really difficult for bylaw enforcement to first of all understand what has happened, in addition to the technical aspects of what should happen.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then the other thing I think what value bylaw provides is that, you're looking at what building is saying, for argument's sake. Okay, they're saying, well, there's a breach. Okay, well, let's look at the bylaw and then look at something I don't think a lot of other local government folks do, or even the police do, the elements of the offense, right?
Yeah.
So your guys will look at that, break that provision down. Do we have all the facts for each element to prove? Because if we don't have that, we don't have a breach, right? And sometimes you have to have that hard discussion internally to say, well, we're missing this piece of element or something, or this doesn't make sense. And if you can't explain it yourself, how the hell are you gonna explain it to the court or to the lawyers, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you do that due diligence.
And we can't make it up as we go.
I know, I've tried, it doesn't work. We get smacked down in court, but no, and that's it. You're right, the facts are what the facts are, right?
Yeah.
So we're stuck with that. So
Totally.
unless something else, and one thing I do think where the legal services provide value is that we often have had cases where, okay, there's a gap missing or there's a problem here. How do we address that? How do we fix it, right? And you can fix it by a number of ways, right? By either getting new facts or amending the bylaw, or even looking at some case law that's possibly interpreted to your satisfaction, right? And so that's how we can get around something.
Well, you have sent me back to the well on occasion to get additional information. So
yes, for sure. And sometimes we have had to amend bylaws. It's just, life is like that, right? And the thing is, I think the good thing about that is it shows what a great society we have here in what I call the Western world, Canada, British Columbia.
We're fortunate.
We are, because we can't just take a case that is BS, right? We have to have proven elements to make the case.
Sure.
And if we don't have proven elements, then we can't proceed. And that's the reasonable restriction upon government, right?
And that's one of the values that good bylaw enforcement department or officer can bring, is having that fulsome understanding. People working in other departments aren't doing our job, so a lot of times they're not thinking along those same lines. So we can in our purpose in our day-to-day operation, we can pull all those missing pieces together, or at least say we need to identify this or identify that. And I think that's what you were just saying.
Totally. And I think the other thing is we have to separate sometimes the dispute we're dealing with, right? Their personality. They could be a bit of a jackass sometimes, right?
People are people.
People are people. And sometimes they can be really good, right?
Sure.
But we sometimes can get clouded the fact that, well, they're just who they are, and it's difficult, and but let's look at what the facts say.
Right.
And the facts will guide us to where we want to go.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for that.
Cool.
Carolina Arango is asking if you have any tips on managing bylaws that require a subject expert. Carolina's example is trees, where a BEO is called into a tree infraction, but the subject matter expert, the arborist, is the one who needs to make the recommendations. Carolina's found that there's some gaps in evidence collection and in the who does what management.
I almost wonder if this is set up because they know of a file that we're working on for the city. I'll let you answer that maybe at the start. What's your thoughts?
Well, it differs, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. How well are we resourced?
Right.
Primarily a well-written, well drafted and executed tree protection bylaw is going to be your starting point, your foundation, and it should properly lay out where that source of information is coming from. So it would make a reference to a reliance on a trained arborist, and what is the level of training that arborist would have.
Right.
If you don't have a trained professional on staff, well, then obviously you have to outsource.
Right.
and basically be prepared as part of your enforcement activity to pay for that assessment and that report. And that report, again, and you can appreciate this, has to be of enough substance that you can go into the court and rely on it without any doubt. Because as you know, we're proving beyond a reasonable doubt in some of these cases, right?
You're right. And I would take that one step further because I want to be practical with costs, right?
Mhm.
Local governments always have minimal costs.
Yes.
And that's a concern. You go outside of an expert report, it's going to cost you money, right?
Unfortunately, yeah.
It does, right?
Yeah.
And so, but you need it to prove an element of your offense, right?
Mhm.
And a typical, say, community safety officer is not going to provide that evidence as the expertise on trees, for example,
Right.
is not there. So if you have a government, say that's big enough like Langford, you've got an in-house arborist, right? So my recommendation is to use the in-house arborist, recognizing they're an employee of the city, but
Mhm.
also putting the requests and instructions to them as an
You
expert.
have to change
Yeah,
hats.
switch your hats around. You're now there for the courts, right?
Yes.
You're there as an
Yeah.
expert. So good
That's a good
stuff,
point.
bad stuff. Just let it out there because I think that's really the future for a lot of our local governments to minimize costs.
Yeah.
Is can we use our in-house experts to do this?
Mhm.
But they got to, of course, get qualified by the courts.
Yeah.
And if the courts can see that, okay, they're not there as simply a rubber stamp for bylaw, but they're there to say, okay, well, this is on a tree issue. I mean, geez, who's got that expertise? And if they've got the certification, right?
Right.
That's really what you need. Then they should be able to be professional about it and give their
Yeah.
opinion. And of course, they're all subject to cross-examination, right?
Of course,
So-
yeah. But that appearance or that reality of presenting an independent finding is going to be critically important for the
Right.
courts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think again on the independent finding, we got to be careful that they're not answering the court's question on whether there's a breach, right? But really just whatever the finding is related to with
Mhm.
respect to, say, that specific tree or
Yeah.
something, right?
Yeah.
Court can make the bigger finding, but
Mhm.
our guys or gal has got to be much more tighter on with respect to what's there.
Right. And at the beginning of this part of the discussion, the quality of the bylaw itself, the regulatory bylaw, is really what's going to be your foundation
Yes.
in being able to deliver all of those other pieces.
Totally. Yeah.
There's a question that's been highlighted here by several attendants, and it's from Chris Booth, who's asking, should bylaw enforcement return to that standard/original work portfolio, which Chris says is getting neglected in some municipalities? Perhaps then a new enforcement type is created to enforce houseless issues and assistance with the police or the RCMP.
I mean, that comes down to expressing an opinion here, but there is, in reality right now, there is at the provincial level, review being undertaken of the Police Act. And we mentioned tiered positions a few minutes ago, but that may come eventually. The province may, when it finally rounds out the revisions to the Police Act, may create some positions that will be properly placed in dealing with public space management and that type of thing, the unhoused and all of that. And you know, it again comes down to resourcing. Will a community have the resources, the money, the staff available in order to deal with the public space management under the Police Act changes, and still go back to what I often refer to as traditional bylaw enforcement?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that pretty well answers that issue. Spencer, I think we have time for one or two more questions here.
Yes, we're at our 5-minute warning, gentlemen. I have a question here from Dave Ryan, who is asking what your thoughts are on GPS location tracking for officers working alone.
I think it's a great idea, right? What do you think?
Yeah, no, it is. But it's a bit of a that can be a bit of a charged issue, of course.
Okay.
You know, you're going to have some people who believe that is a methodology of spying on staff.
Okay, great. Yeah.
You know, are they doing their job? I mean, this has come up in the past with in some communities as a very real thing. And then it can be further. I don't want to say complicated, but then you've got management union issues, you know, collective agreements coming into play.
Right.
So that's not an easy question to answer.
Okay.
It really isn't. Like you pointed out, GPS, officer safety, ideal. It's perfect.
Yeah.
You know, it really truly is. You know, and if as an organization you're issuing cell phones as part of your officer protection plan. Yeah. In addition to, you might have radios, that kind of thing. But if you're issuing cell phones, there's always that tracking mechanism through cell phones that you can use. We've incorporated that at times with our staff, with our officers. They know fully well, especially in the summertime when we bring on summer bike patrol.
Right.
We have seasonal officers. They come in, they do trail parks patrols on bikes or foot, and it's always important to know where they might be, because they don't have the protection of being in a cocoon like a vehicle can offer. They're out exposed to the public. So I'm very aware of officer safety, and I always make sure that we know where our teams are.
So you do in Langford have that ability to know.
It's not 100%,
okay,
but yeah, but it is an option for us, and the officers all know that there are reasons for that.
So my thoughts is that if you're doing it in Langford, that's great, and it's working for you. My view is if you're in a rural community, I definitely would want to have that.
More so.
Yeah, particularly if you're going out, because, you know, sometimes to get somewhere, it's an hour and a half, 2.5 hours just getting there, right? And that's isolating, and that's, you know, you need to know that. And so I know that, you know, and sometimes hopefully there's cell service as well too, right?
Well, that's the other wild card, isn't it?
Yeah. A lot of questions there, right? But I do think that, you know, eventually we're going to have, you know, satellite connections, you know, maybe through Star Alliance, whatever it is that, forgot what.
Starlink?
Starlink, thank you. Star. What am I thinking? Star Wars or something? I don't know.
You always are.
This is a Star Wars table right here, so people can't see this. You know, but yeah, Starlink, the ability to be remote if necessary, because, you know, one thing with bylaw, and this is a thing I'd always say to people, is it's a physical job too. You're not going to be.
Fortunately, it is.
Yes, it's not one of those things that you can phase out with technology. You're going to need people.
AI is not going to replace a good bylaw enforcement officer.
Absolutely not. And so that's the job security there, folks. But I wouldn't want my bylaw officers going out 2 hours away, particularly if they're alone, particularly if they're in a community like you're the only bylaw officer. Like, that is crazy. And so I think they need to, and of course, before you do that, you tell your team where you're going to be, what you're going to go, any
check-in procedures,
normal procedures, but then also where, you know, let's track it. And I think, you know, if there's a privacy issue, you can always turn it off when you're back in the urban setting, but turn it off when you're going on the mission, right?
Yeah.
But when you're on the mission, I mean, that's a critical, and that's a safety issue.
Yeah. Well, the officer is also responsible for their own well-being, in addition to the employer.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
It's a shared responsibility.
It is.
We have a few questions remaining, but I'm cognizant of the time.
We can go one more question, Spencer. Pick the best one.
Yeah.
Do that.
Well, I'll go with Walter because Dave has already, that we just answered Dave's original question. So Walter Popov is asking, what further action can be taken after a NOT, I assume he means a ticketing process, if a resident has built a residence without a building permit in a floodplain and refuses to comply with the floodplain bylaw.
Okay, so I'm not,
Can we talk section 57 notice?
yeah, I mean,
Notice on title.
I think that's what he's referring to perhaps, like
Yeah.
you've said you built something, you slap on a section 57 notice
Right,
saying there's a
right.
contravention.
Yeah.
And that's bad.
I'm guessing
right?
that's, yeah, the
Yeah.
reference there.
Yeah,
I'm making an amendment here. I believe NOT is a notice on title.
Yes.
yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a section 57 notice and title, they built something, it's in a floodplain. And here's the thing, and we've done litigation of this in the past.
Okay.
Uh, and so to me, it's also a dollars and cents, right? In most things, and I'm a big believer in using section 57s, and most of the times it's like in urbanish areas, and it's like, you know,
Typically.
yeah, they're doing like, 10 every month or something, right? And that's great. And all we're doing there, the purpose is ultimately to flag future purchasers to say there's a building contravention,
Mhm.
it's on, the land title, and it could be as little as, $600 or as much as $600,000.
Yeah.
But we're letting you know that in advance. That's ultimately the purpose, that it can only be used for building. And that's great, right? And generally, in most cases, it's like unlawful construction, blah, blah, blah. But you know what? We're not gonna spend dollars to go after that.
So let me ask you this.
Yeah.
And this is something that I've often wondered about, from a legal perspective, once the notice is on title.
Yeah.
Is that sufficient to protect the local government from potential liability?
And that's a great question, okay? Because what I'm first trying to put it on is they protect them from liability from purchasers who
Yes,
buy property,
absolutely.
right? So
Yeah.
good. Now the next step,
Mhm.
this is the key, and this is the judgment call that you have to make with building and with senior staff and with bylaw. And with the risk manager, if your local government has
There you
one,
go.
right?
Yeah.
But if there's gonna be the potential for third-party use on the property.
Yeah.
Or just frankly, third-party even stupidity, like on a floodplain, right? You're
Yeah.
gonna have a party, the water's gonna come up. Then you probably wanna take it that next step, and I'll give two examples. So we have done floodplain enforcement,
Mhm.
and just to remove that, because it's like, it's in a floodplain. I mean,
Sure.
we don't know if the river's gonna over spill its banks, and
Right.
you're all screwed, right? And of course, to protect the local government. I mean, lawyers unfortunately only think liability, they're not thinking public safety too much. Are we protected? Put a letter out there, put the notice of title, we're done, right?
Right.
But you gotta take the next step and say, okay, well, are they gonna invite, Jimmy, Joe and Sally and all the kids, and we're gonna have this big party. River flows over banks, people are gonna get hurt, right? And
Absolutely.
these will things that won't happen in the middle of the day, they'll happen in the middle of the night. The other thing is inside a building though, and you've got to notice the title, we've had a classic case where the guy builds a deck, but he doesn't put railings on
Railings,
it,
yeah.
and it's 8 feet drop, right? And like that's just common sense stupidity, and he had children, right? So we had to take it, even with the notice of title, had to do the litigation
Okay.
to stop it. And I remember like around that time we did that, former Premier Mike Harcourt slipped off his deck in
That's right.
Galliano or some island
Yeah.
and really hurt himself,
Yeah,
right?
that's right too.
So to me, that's the step. What's the foreseeability
Mhm.
of an accident happening? And if it's foreseeable, yeah, you're gonna get sued.
Yeah, so doing an inspection would result in gathering certain information to determine whether or not there is an increased risk or maybe a minimal risk. And then the local government might make some decisions based on an actual inspection.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'd be pretty reasonable too, right? Like I wouldn't spend the money on the legal action litigation, right? Only if you have to, right? So if you say you've got a person, I'm thinking more of the deck issue. We got a lot of deck issues, right? Hey, listen, you need a deck. We appreciate you can't do it right now, but we'll give you a year to get it done. And you put it in a consent order, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, one of the provisions, if anything happens, they're on the hook, not the local government, right?
Sure, yeah.
That does more than just a notice of title. That gives you the court order,
Yeah.
gives you the deadline, and then you've acted as a local government, more than a reasonable local government. You've taken the next step to protect
So it's a
people.
defensible position.
Totally.
Yeah.
And then you just got to wait it out till they get this done. You know, the issue of the building on the floodplain though is a little more challenging because that's
Mhm.
likely their home. And
Yeah.
like where are they gonna live? How's this gonna work out?
Yeah.
That's, you know, and I don't know what to say other than you probably gotta take it the next step,
Sure.
right? If, especially if they're, you know, if it's not just like the trailer on the home or some part-time cabin that they're gonna use like in the summer. If that's gonna be a permanent residence where they're staying there regularly, take it to court.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another piece, and it's just a quick comment, value of the notice on title. I mean, you're talking about potential purchasers. The other thing that I found over the years that when we've placed a notice on title, council's made that decision, it's gone on title. There may be a period of time where all of a sudden the phone will ring at City Hall and someone's in a panic because they're trying to renew their mortgage and they can't.
Yes.
Because the financial institution has said, there's a bylaw contravention notice. You have to fix that before we'll even consider refinancing. And now they're in a panic mode because they have to pay out that mortgage basically.
Yeah.
So that is a motivating factor. And I've used that well as an enforcement tool.
Yeah, no, that's great. Lauren, listen, it's been great having you
Yeah,
on the
thanks.
premiere show of our future Friday Forum podcast. It's great having the audience here engage with us. There's going to be a survey done afterwards. We're always trying to improve what we're doing.
Can I fill it out?
Yes, you're going to get an email too. One of the things on the survey though is, you know, these producers wouldn't let me have my special mug that I got from my daughter Lucy. So like I'd like to have that until we can afford at GovLaw to have real coffee mugs and stuff. I'd like to have that, but let me know if you think that's okay or whether we have to stick with the water glasses for now. But you'll get a survey. So thank you for joining us, folks. And we hope this will be the first of many that will help engage with you and help us do what we're always doing well in bylaw, trying to build a better world. Thank you for your time and have a great Friday.
Thanks, Troy. I appreciate having my own
Cheers.
glass.
Cheers.